Hey everyone, my name is Jordan. I'm one of the IAs at this year's Australs. This is just a quick seminar on how to manage your panelists at Australs. So obviously this is using the Australs format, which means that this is a voting format of deliberation, not a consensus format. So this video probably is not going to be the most useful to you if you're prepping for a format that uses consensus-based deliberation, something like Australian Easters or any British parliamentary major, for instance. With that out of the way, though, let's talk really quickly about the rules of voting, and then we'll talk about what you should do immediately after the debate ends, what you should do after everyone has arrived at their conclusion, stuff about writing the OA, stuff about what happens if you get rolled, and then lastly on feedback to your panels after the deliberation has ended and the OA has ended. So firstly, on what happens, on voting rather, what is important is that in the voting format, every member of the panel, excepting the trainees, must come to their own independent decision about the debate and about the speaker scores that they want to assign. So in this format, your panelists and yourself will all have a private URL, and often you'll get a paper ballot as well. You need to fill both of those out, and of course they need to match in silence after the debate ends without any sort of discussion between yourself and the panel. It has to be independent. And once you have submitted your digital ballot and you've written your paper ballot, that is unchangeable. The only instance in which it would ever be possible to change anything that you have now submitted and written is if you have made a mistake. So for example, if you made a typo on your online ballot and it doesn't match what you've written on your paper ballot, or if you've realized that you accidentally used the wrong maths to arrive at your reply speech scores, then you would want to go talk to Tab and AWGScore. Don't change anything that you've done. Go and talk to them. They will get it sorted out for you. And that's true of your panelists if they've made similar mistakes. So with that out of the way, what happens after the debate ends? So the teams have shaken hands, they're walking out. I think it's often helpful, especially really early in the tournament where you're dealing with people who might be judging Australs for the first time, to just give them a couple of gentle reminders before you get into deliberation. So remind them that there is a speaker scale that they're able to refer to that the AWGScore will have published. That should have been provided at briefing. It's often posted online as well, and they should ideally have a photo of it on their phones. You, as a chair, should very much have a photo of it on your phone, and if they don't, you should offer to let them have a look at it. Second thing is just to remind them that reply scores are scored by assigning that reply speech the equivalent in a substantive speech, so using the 70 to 80 range, and then dividing that by 2, so not minusing 40, and that the average reply speech is a 37.5, not a 35. Last thing is just to make sure that they've got their paper ballots, tell them that they want to fill those out, and then just fold them in half or flip them over so that you can't see what's on them and pass them to you once they've arrived at their decision. The last thing is that I think it's often helpful to give them an indicative time by which you'd like to have their paper ballot. You should be prepared to be flexible on this. Sometimes panelists will be really, really fast. Sometimes they'll want to take a little bit more time. And there are ways that you can give them that extra time without eating into your ability to write a good OA. I'll cover that in a second. But it's often helpful to give them just an indication around, hey, if you can try to aim to have your ballot to me at about 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and use your judgment on as the chair in terms of if it was an extremely complicated debate, probably give them a bit more time. And that'll help to reassure them and give them the confidence that they're able to take the necessary time to arrive at their conclusion. If it was a really simple debate, you can probably give them a shorter time period. But this is just to make sure that they don't feel pressured to give you a result in like 30 seconds, basically. Let's then talk about what happens when you do have those results. The first thing is that you cannot look at those results until you have finished your own ballots. So your decision also needs to be independent. And if you ever encounter a chair looking at the ballots of the panelists before they have written their own ballot, that is a big issue. It impacts that chair's impartiality and independence. It's a violation of the rules of the voting format. And you should let AWGScore know that that has occurred. You should also make sure to note it on feedback on that chair. And if you are a chair, don't do that. It's really, really bad. But once you have done that, you of course can look, and you will look. Once you've got all of the ballots, you're going to unfold them or flip them over or whatever. Often the panelists will want to have a look at the full suite of them. So you might want to put them out in front of you on the desk so that they can see what scores you've given, what scores the other one has given, and stuff like that. This is where you're going to find out if your call was unanimous, if it was a split, or if you got rolled. And getting rolled just means that you, as the chair, have 2 or more panelists who have given a different call to you. So I'm going to talk about what happens if you do get rolled later on. But for now, let's assume that you haven't gotten rolled. There might be a split though, and we'll cover that. The first thing that you want to do is structure the discussion around how to actually evaluate the debate. So as the chair, you often want to be thinking about this as the debate is progressing in terms of what questions are you going to need to ask and establish in your OA in order to explain to the teams how you arrived at your decision. I think often a kind of useful order is to go through questions of characterization. So where is the debate taking place? When is it taking place? If it's a policy debate, who's doing the policy? What does that implementation look like? Is there enforcement that needs to be dealt with? And if it's a regrets or supports debate, thinking about the counterfactual, what does that look like as well kind of comes in here. Second question then is about the facts of the debate. So this is, I guess, kind of the substantive issues that have been raised by teams in terms of what is occurring under this policy or in this counterfactual world. How persuaded are you as a panel that what they're saying is true? How likely is it to occur? Those are the types of conversations you want to be having here. Once you've gone through that, then you want to go into the weighing. So weighing different issues against each other and going to what the teams have provided you around that weighing, going to the impacting that they've done, what you thought mattered at the end of the debate. Those are the, I think, kind of rough order in which you want to go through this, but this is just a guide. It's not crucial. Sometimes you might want to talk about weighing first and then talk about the substantive questions. That's also totally fair, especially if this has been a debate where it's the weighing question that's more crucial in terms of determining things. And the issue of substantive reality is one that teams haven't really dealt with so much because maybe it's just very clear. So that's totally fine. You can do this in different ways. Lastly, then you want to be, as you're doing this, writing your OA, obviously, and generally your OA is going to be the same structure as that deliberation will be. And you're asking your panelists as you're doing that and as you're writing to provide their thoughts and weigh in. You want to be making sure that you're giving your panelists, and if you've got trainees, your trainees as well, equal time to weigh in. And that just looks like making sure that you're calling on them and that you're giving them clear questions that they can answer. So I think it's often unhelpful to ask a panelist to just explain their thoughts generally, because then they're going to be in a position where they feel like they need to give you an OA, but they need to somehow cram it into 2 minutes and they haven't had time to prepare to give you an OA. So that's often quite unfair and unreasonable to ask. Instead, you want to be asking them something like, do you think that the side affirmative was able to prove successfully that that people were more likely to be employed on their side, or something quite clear and concrete like that is often more helpful. Second thing is that sometimes you'll end up in a position where you have a panelist or a trainee who is just overwhelmed and they're saying, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. I don't know, I was really confused. I didn't follow it. Maybe they're saying something like, I'm really sorry, but I just actually couldn't track that speaker's speech. The accent was really different and I'm not used to it. If that is the position that you're in with one of your panelists or your trainees, that's okay. Don't bully them into contributing. Make sure that you're being kind and compassionate and encouraging them to have a go. But if they're saying, quite clearly that they just don't know and they don't have anything to say and they're not comfortable saying anything, that's fine. Just leave them be. Obviously, think about that when you provide their feedback later on. But, as you move into new issues and new questions in the debate, do check back in because they might have changed their minds, they might have relaxed, or they might have not had something to contribute on issue 1, but they might have some thoughts on issue 2. So that's the kind of thing that you want to be doing there, just to make sure that they are included. The third thing I think to note is that sometimes you'll also have the opposite issue where you'll have panelists who are very enthusiastic and very confident, and they're really keen to jump in and provide their thoughts. And they might be so enthusiastic that they're even doing things like jumping in when the other panelist is speaking, going, yeah, I really agree. Like I saw it like this, or, oh, I disagree with that. I actually saw it in a different way. And obviously there's sometimes a temptation to kind of let it spiral into like a really, enthusiastic and vigorous discussion and stuff like that. But you only have 15 minutes. You need this to be clear, and you want to reflect what your panelists are saying in your OA. So if you have that happening, I would say just say very firmly to that panelist, but again, respectfully, thank you so much for your enthusiasm. It's so great to see you so keen on the debate, but I have to listen to the other panelists as well, and I really want to hear their thoughts. So I'll ask you a question in a sec, but just let them finish what they were saying. I think that often you want to jump in early if this is happening, because if it keeps happening, that can make the other panelists feel disheartened or embarrassed, or they might not feel so confident speaking up because the other panelist seems to really know what they're saying. So just making sure that you're really kind of being conscious of that. You're not letting one panelist dominate that deliberation. And again, of course, the panelist that's doing that probably isn't even aware of the effect that that might be having on the rest of the panel. But you're the chair, and your job is to make sure that this deliberation is fair and that everyone gets to have their say. So make sure you're using that power. Once you've done your deliberation, and as you're doing that, you'll have been writing down your thoughts and creating the OA, then you want to make sure that you look over those ballots, make sure that there's nothing that's wrong. So for instance, if somebody has forgotten to put a speaker score in, or if maybe you think that they might have made a mistake when it comes to the scoring of replies, which are often something that are new to many people and stuff like that. If it's just like there's a number missing, get the panelists to put the number in. Ideally, you should have noticed that before you started deliberation, but if you didn't, deal with it now. And if you think that a panelist might have made a reply scoring error, just ask them what they thought the equivalent score was using the substantive range. And if that doesn't match with what they've written on their papers, so if they've written 35 on their paper and you go, oh, I see you've scored this reply 35. What is the equivalent score using the 70 to 80 range that you would have given it? And they go, oh, thought it was about average. I would have given it a 75. Then that probably indicates that, well, it does indicate that they've gotten the maths wrong. So don't change the paper ballot or anything like that. Just send them onto Tab or onto AWGCORT, and that can be fixed up in the back end. But don't change anything on the ballots or using the private URL or anything like that. Just send them to Tab and AWGCORT, and that can get sorted out. Okay, a few things to, I guess, cover off aside from that sort of more ideal situation I just described. First thing is, what if it's 5 minutes into deliberation, you need to get cracking, and you've got a panelist that is just going like, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know yet, I'm not sure. Usually the answer to this is you have to balance the need to have a deliberation where you can help those panelists and come to a unified understanding of the debate and they can contribute to the OA, against the fact that you don't want to be rushing somebody to create a snap decision, especially if the debate was really complicated. If the debate was really complicated and you can see that the panelist is feeling overwhelmed and needs the extra time, usually it's best to give that to them. And what you can do is just start writing your OA in silence. And obviously you can start doing that from the moment that you finalized your call. But at some point you will need to just go, I'm really sorry, but we need to have a proper deliberation, which means that you need to come to a call, and just get them to call it. I think it's kind of rare after maybe the 6-minute mark of thinking that additional thinking is going to clarify things substantially. Obviously, ask your panelist and try to help them come to the, try to give them what they need in terms of their ability to come to the correct call, but make sure that you're also not putting yourself in a position where your other panelist is now only going to get a really short amount of time to give their thoughts in the deliberation, and they are not going to get scored fairly as a result of that. So, balance those two interests, use your discretion, and be careful on it. Second thing is that, sometimes you'll get rolled, and then your role in terms of the deliberation is going to look a little bit different. I think often it's helpful to just make sure that you are conscious of how you react to the news that you've been rolled. Sometimes chairs will be quite visibly aggravated or frustrated, and that'll carry through in how they conduct the deliberation, or they might even do things like not engage at all in the deliberation. That's really bad. If you're a panelist and you see that happening from your chair, you should pass that on in feedback, and you might even want to raise it directly with AWGCORT as well. So if you've been rolled and you are experiencing those feelings, that's totally fair. Being rolled can be very frustrating. Just take a deep breath and then remember to be professional about it. What you then want to do is ask the panelists to have a think about who wants to give the OA. Maybe they're going to say, maybe one of them immediately is like, I want to do it, and the other one is like, I really don't. Great, then that's sorted out. Maybe they want to wait until after deliberation to decide. That's fair enough. That's their prerogative. Maybe you have a position where neither of them want to do it. That's not great. What you want to do in that position, I think often, is just kind of go, okay, look, I'm here to help you. Are either of you, you're able to ask me for questions. I'm happy to help you in terms of your phrasing and stuff like that. You can run the OA by me and I can give you a sense check. Does that reassure either of you that you're comfortable to do the OA? And sometimes a panelist will go, oh, I didn't realize I could ask questions. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I'm willing to do it. If so, great. And then I think kind of the last thing that you can default to is just to start going through in terms of going, okay, look, neither of you want to give the OA. Have either of you actually ever given an OA before? Hopefully, at least one of them has. If one of them has and the other one hasn't, the one that has should probably cop it. If neither of them have, then probably what you want to do is just go, okay, look, let's get into deliberation and see how you feel. And if you have to, choose the one who is doing better in deliberation in terms of is able to phrase their thoughts clearly, is giving explanations that make the most sense, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it will be your call to choose. And you should let them know, ultimately, that you will be in that position where you'll have to choose them. So that's kind of the process there. When it comes to that deliberation itself, you're still the chair, you're still managing it. So what you want to do there is you might want to propose kind of what you were thinking you were going to do in the deliberation around kind of the order of issues to be hashed out. One of them might really disagree, or both of them might disagree. They might be like, oh, no, no, no. We really need to talk about weighing before we can get into the substantive issues or something like that. If that's what they're saying, then, I would say defer to them. At the end of the day, at this point, the deliberation is now meant to serve the purpose of helping whichever one of them ends up writing the OA, write that OA. So you're still the manager, but you're probably a little bit more passive here. And your personal views on the debate, you should obviously provide. But you probably want to make sure that you are really prioritizing the majority to enable them to make sure that that OA is happening and that it's reflective of the views of the majority. So I guess kind of at that point, you're functioning less as somebody who needs their contributions to write your OA, and instead you're helping them to elucidate their contributions so that they can write the OA. Last thing then is just when they are writing that OA, you can help them out a bit. So they might go, I want to explain this issue using kind of this phrase. Does that make sense to you? And you can go, oh, look, maybe the better way of phrasing it is like X. But I think a good way of thinking about your role here is it's sort of like you can be like an editor if they've written an essay, so you can help them out with kind of phrasing and clarity, but you probably can't help them out with the substantive content. At the end of the day, you were in the minority, they were in the majority, and if after deliberation they don't agree with your views, then they don't agree with your views. So don't use a panelist asking you for help as an opportunity to try to get your read of the debate pushed into the OA. That's not the purpose. It's not going to be helpful for anybody. Instead, make sure that you're being helpful in terms of supporting them to express their views, or if they have questions about your views in terms of they want to represent them as the minority of the panel, then of course provide your views in that capacity. But you don't want to be trying to write the OA for them, and you also don't want to be trying to push your views in where that panelist is trying to focus on representing the views of the majority. So just make sure that you are helping them out and that you're not trying to override them. That's, I think, basically it. Last thing is that when you're doing feedback on your panelists, or if they come up and ask you for feedback, which sometimes they might, make sure that you are thinking about not just what they provided in the deliberation, but also at how you manage the deliberation and how you were enabling them to provide those contributions. So if you realize after the fact that you did actually let one panelist speak over the other one a lot, then you probably want to make a note of that on both panelists in terms of the one that was speaking a lot. Maybe you want to make note to the AWGCOR that this was somebody who kind of wasn't responding efficiently and perhaps is being a bit rude to the other panelists and speaking over them and stuff like that. And similarly for the panelist who was being spoken over, you probably don't want to punish them for that. That's quite unfair. And instead you want to think about what they were able to provide and evaluate them based on that. And to note that this was somebody who unfortunately was spoken over in that process. And so that might affect your ability to score them fairly. And that'll be factored in by the AWGCOR. So just make sure that you're thinking about that as well, and making sure that if there were issues in that deliberation, if somebody didn't get a fair shake, that you're factoring that in on their feedback and you're not punishing them for it. And of course, the AWGCOR will give you guidance around how to use the range when you're providing that feedback and stuff like that. So I'll leave that to them. Otherwise, best of luck at Australs this year or whatever year that you're looking at, and I hope that you have a fantastic time with your panels. Cheers.